All right, I'd like to talk about the role of women in history and myth during the first 4,000 years of civilization, from basically recorded civilization 3,500 to um, 500 CE. That's 4,000 years. And the um, I do make an allowance to at least get the start of Islam and the influence of Muhammad. Um, and I'll talk a little bit about the eras. And right off the bat, I want to acknowledge my very close friend, Roger Barrow, who has been my muse on feminine competence and the problems with the way men do things with their instincts driven by testosterone. And I think, unfortunately, I've come to agree with a lot of what he said. And the most recent example is the countries who've responded poorly being headed by men, and the countries that have responded well to the COVID pandemic have been headed by women by and large. Of course, I'm making generalizations, and you can find exceptions. And this is true for the whole talk. If I'm covering 4,000 years on any one topic that covers half of the population of that time, I'm going to be painting with very, very broad strokes and could be challenged on virtually everything I say. But I think will serve as a point of departure. It's come about because of another run through world history that I'm doing with my close family and friends. And this time through, I've been paying attention to the influence of the feminine in women more than usual. Of course, the textbook that I had in high school didn't talk nearly as much about the role of women as this textbook from around 2008 does. It is a textbook taught by a very dear friend, mentor, and history guru who's inspired me in many different ways, Ramsey Thomas. Ramsey taught at Alkalani's high school for decades and decades, and did the advanced placement history. We've gone through this with him once about 10 years ago. And upon request from certain members of my family who are curious about what constitutes a civilization, we started up again about 4 months ago. So 4,000 years in 4 months. And the point that the history book makes is that when we were hunter and gatherers, there was more an equality of function of the sexes. There's an echo of that in that some herding cultures are even still matrilineal. The first evidence that we have from the hunter-gatherer eras 40,000 years ago is the Venus of Willendorf, celebrating the fertility of the earth. And it's very obvious that why we're called mammalians are initial nurturing and the center of our sexuality in many ways is centered around the breast. After all, we're in the mammalian kingdom, but it begs the question, should it be the mammalian queendom? We jump forward to 17,000 years ago, a relief in a cave that was found of a woman whose right hand holds the crescent moon. Some of it's been broken off. Her left hand is either on a pregnant abdomen or is pointing towards a menstruating vagina. The implication of the 13 notches in the crescent moon is that they were able to keep track of the number of lunar cycles in a year. That would be the 13 lunar months in a year. And that, isn't it interesting that the lunar cycle, 28 days, approximates the menstrual cycle? As one of my grandsons said to me, well, Grandpa, that's just an example of biological adaptation. So interesting speculation. So everything changed with the agricultural revolution, the Neolithic revolution, where we discovered that stationary living had its advantage in terms of planting and herding and domesticating animals. And here physical strength was more prized. Also property became more prized and was something that needed to be guarded, maybe more than in the hunter-gatherer lifestyle, where there weren't as many possessions. There was some concern as well about inheritance. Who's going to get my property? And for the man, there was a concern which of his sons would get it. And this is where human existence took a turn for patrimony, patrilineal organization. And that was a big change. And we see, I mentioned earlier that earlier societies may have been matrilineal, but here the organization became more organized around the man. I mentioned earlier herding societies. Some are still matrilineal. We experienced that living in the Southwest on the Navajo and Hopi Indian reservations, both of which are matrilineal. And we'll see the Jewish people are still matrilineal, and whether that was from millennia of herding is a speculation, who knows. Yeah, women took a back seat on the farm, but they were still seen as being very important symbolically when it came to fertility. The earth was, at least in Anatolia, recognized to be feminine. You had Mother Earth in the first city, really, in Anatolia, around 7,000 BCE. And this is where that city was, quite near the Mesopotamia, but distinct from it, as we'll see in culture. And we're starting out here in central Anatolia. We're going to be winding up in Western Anatolia, in Ephesus, which has, and so this whole area, I would say, is the center of feminine influence on a civilization. And this is a model of what Catalhoyuk might have looked like. It looks to my wife and I a lot like a Hopi village. And this Earth Mother morphed into a goddess who persisted throughout history, at least through Roman times, and in the mystery religions, even possibly beyond. And her name was Sybil. And she spread throughout all of Anatolia, Asia Minor. Her animal was the lion, and we're going to be seeing a lot of the lion as we march through, talking about the feminine presence in myths. And she went on to Rome, where she had an oracle, and you can see also a lion at her right knee. Madrid has a fountain that celebrates Sybil and her chariot being drawn by two lions. Flash forward for a minute to the Greek pantheon and the goddess Rhea. I'll show you later where exactly she fits into the family tree. She was not the very first mother, but she was the second mother. And her animal was also the lion. And connected to Sybil, possibly. Heading east now from the Anatolia Plain into Mesopotamia, we see another totem of fertility, possibly sexuality in Sumer, what may be a Mother Earth statue. In Mesopotamia, eventually you had the northern migration of clearly Semitic people. Maybe Sumerians were also Semitic, but for sure the Akkadians were linguistically. And they had a fertility goddess to whom gifts should be given. We'll see later on that the Semitic culture turned away from the idea of a feminine fertility goddess, most definitely. The goddess that they did celebrate, though, back then was Inanna, or also known as Ishtar. She was the Akkadian goddess of at least the war and another few things, as was Athena later on. So there may be an interesting connection, and you can see the lion at her feet as well. And you'll see this star-like object. This is her sign. Here's another relief of her with the lion, like we've seen with Rhea and Sybil. Again, the lion underfoot. But now you see the owl. And she's also variously known as the Queen of the Night. And so that gives rise to the question, well, is she connected to the moon? Well, this is her sign, this star. So she's not primarily moon, but her father was the crescent moon. So she has some relationship to the moon. We can't know 100% what it was. And here is the Ishtar Gate reassembled in Berlin from the Mesopotamia and Assyrian peoples. There was in Mesopotamia a feminine cult, the Usa cult of the moon, and there you see also a lion. This was one of the first targets of Muhammad when he achieved political and military power. It morphed strangely into a male god, which shouldn't surprise us, Hubal. He became the main god of the moon of the Arabian Peninsula. So this was sort of a process of defeminization, if you will, just a speculation. But certainly Muhammad completed that task when he sent his minions to destroy the cult of Usa and their temple. And there's a famous story about how that happened. We don't have time to tell all stories now, but look up Usa cult and Muhammad. And this is Hubal. He was connected to quite a few things in addition to the moon. And he was one of the main gods that was in the Kaaba. The Kaaba, which we know as the center of Islam, was the center of polytheism in the Arab Peninsula for millennia before Islam. The change was Muhammad was a reformer, a monotheist who came into the Kaaba, much like Jesus went into the temple, and threw out the 360 gods that each had their own slot. And interesting, one of the main gods that Muhammad kept was Allah, the sky god. He became at least adopted the name, probably quite different from the stories of the Allah that sits in the Kaaba before Islam, quite different than the characteristics of the Allah that existed after. But it is interesting that they kept the name. The veil and secluding women, where does that come from? Well, way before Islam. That is a Middle Eastern Semitic trait. You can't pin it on Islam. It's deeper culturally than that. And so we have today veiled women to the extreme in Afghanistan, as this figure represents. Now, Jewish women had property rights. As I said earlier, they were matrilineal, maybe because they were a herding culture for so long. But they had a lesser role in religion, just as we saw that the Usa cult had been demoted. And why was that? Something about men being uncomfortable with it. But in Judaism, this is meant to show the Temple of Solomon. Who knows what the Temple of Solomon looked like? But this is the representation that the women were separate. This is not in the spirit of Ishtar or Usa at all. The men were down on the main floor dancing ecstatically and making music while the women watched. And there are some synagogues today that still have balconies. Islam, being an Abrahamic religion, stemming off of and keeping the Old Testament. Obviously, they don't have the complete story of the New Testament, but Jesus is a respected prophet in Islam. So being in this tradition of an Abrahamic religion, they too separate the sexes. And many times we've visited mosques with my wife, Aiko, and I've been invited in, but she's been told she can't come in. So we've experienced that directly ourselves, the separation of the sexes in worship. So what is responsible for that? Well, there's a new story. The new Abrahamic story, as reflected in the Bible, written down really for the first time in Babylonian captivity, when the Jews had their Temple of Solomon destroyed in the 4th to 5th century BCE. They finally wrote down some of the bardic stories that had been handed down orally. And one of those stories is of creation and how God created Adam. And Eve came from Adam's rib. And I want to contrast that, take a time out here and fast forward to Greek culture and their story of creation, how different it is. Their story of creation is the feminine, Gaia, the earth mother, supreme, first created all living things herself. She was the creator, not God, or not a monolithic God. And of course, she that stemmed from the fertility of the earth. That's where she got her power, and that fertility she used to create humans. What a different story than Adam and Eve, who wind up in the Garden of Eden, where the woman, far from being the creator, is the spoiler, who is tempted by the fruit that she's been told not to partake, the fruit of knowledge. And here it's explicitly the devil that's tempted her. And below, you see them being banished from the Garden of Eden. Banished, reinforced. And then there's an interesting sideline I just can't ignore, and this is the concept of Lilith. Lilith was speculated upon in the Babylonian Talmud in the 3rd century CE. And the speculation was that Adam had a first wife that was created from the same clay as Adam. And Genesis is a little bit ambivalent or ambiguous, I should say, on that. Genesis 2:22, male and female, he created them. And so could there have been another woman? The way she's depicted here, not much of an improvement. And then, of course, when you have a theory, you look for anything to verify it. And there is the use of the word Lilith in Isaiah 34:14, as Lilith being a demonic entity. So again, the feminine is not being portrayed, even with two women, as being very good. And so here we are in the Garden of Eden, and is there a triangle? And is this Eve being tempted by the devil, the serpent? And what's Lilith doing over there with Adam? It's interesting, a little bit far out and weird, but interesting. So now we get to Egypt. We've been with the Semites, who have not treated women very well. Certainly, they didn't fare as well as they did on the Anatolian plain, Asia Minor, or what we now know as Turkey. But we turn to Egypt, and here women fared better, at least better than in Semitic culture. We're not going to go into detail on the 9 tiers of the family tree. I just want to focus on tier 2 with Ra, and then tier 3 with Hathor and Sekhmet. So here's Ra, and responsible for sun, and obviously I'm making great generalizations just to be able to get through this in an hour. But in the 3rd tier are the feminine gods that got into a lot of stories and got a lot of room in the bardic tales that evolved in Egypt over millennia. Hathor and Sekhmet. And it turns out that Hathor became one of the main goddesses that supported the only documented female pharaoh. There may have been some others that passed, but as male, but she was clearly female. And Hathor was her guiding spirit. And she's at the tomb, and notice Hathor's ears. They're the ears of a cow. So this introduces the concept of a cow versus a lion. So we've got the lion story already from Sybil and from Mesopotamia. But here, Hathor and Sekhmet are 2 sides of the same goddess. So Hathor is the gentle and nurturing side of the goddess, while Sekhmet is the fierce and destructive, the lioness side. Hathor, the holy heifer that symbolizes the sun, the moon, and the stars. And here you see a portrayal of the goddess actually being two-faced. Here, the heifer has dominated the feline, with the cats reduced to little kittens in a headdress. The Hathor evolved and frankly was portrayed as a cow sometimes, and in this depiction, she's got the sun between her cow's horns. This is going to endure. It implies that there's an alliance with Ra. Hathor had temples devoted to her where the priests were all women, priestesses, and their specialty was to interpret dreams and to be female oracles. This is one of the best preserved ones at Dendura. The other feminine goddess is Nut. And she is the only feminine sky god. In a lot of polytheistic religions, you have one dominant sky god who goes on and often becomes the major god. That's what happened with Zeus. But in Egypt, it's a woman, and she drapes herself across the sky invisibly. And where is she in the family tree? She's in the 5th generation. So now we're down here, and her husband is Geb, and they're going to have some very interesting kids and grandkids that we'll get to talking about. But Nut's main job is to swallow the sun at sunset and then take it into her system, as it were, and push it out the other end as a sunrise pellet, shall we call it? And Nut is also portrayed as a cow. So Hathor and Nut, and we're going to see in just a second Isis related to the cow. And that, of course, relates to the fertility, the nurturing of the cow. And in Hinduism, they're sacred. There's going to be the story of Europa, which relates to the cow family a little bit differently in Greek mythology. So Hathor slowly cedes her role to Isis, who is one of the daughters of Nut. And Isis slowly overshadows Hathor completely. Isis, like her mother Nut with the sun, is involved in resurrection with death and rebirth. Nut with the sun daily, and we're in the soap opera that is Isis's family. Within her family, she is going to be the one who resurrects, repairs damage, and arranges rebirth. So the 9 tiers, the mother Nut, the next generation, Nut's kids. So Iris has a brother, Osiris, and they get married. As so often with pharaohs, often married their sisters. And that can't be good genetically. But who knew? It was a practice. But they had a evil brother, Seth. They eventually had a child, but that's going to be quite a tale, how they managed to have a kid. But that's who you need to know about in the 6th and 7th tiers. Isis' husband is Osiris with this distinctive headdress. And here she is with their son, Horus, Madonna and child. There are no coincidences, and that portrayal of mother and child is duplicated, a universal theme, unavoidable. It had to be. But they're both involved in stories of Immaculate Conception, Isis and Mary. And it's complicated, and it involves the bad uncle. We'll get to that. But first, here's a depiction of the Immaculate Conception as Mary experienced it when the angel came and then informed her that she was going to have the Son of God, not in the ordinary way. And Isis had Horus, not in the ordinary way. Why? Because Seth attacked uh, uh, Osiris, the husband of Isis, and cut him up into 14 pieces. No more Osiris. And then in a different time frame, after Horus is born, he pokes out Horus's eye. Isis repairs the eye, and she puts Osiris back together again. She's the healer. She's the resurrectionist, if you will. And the eye of Horus. And she is, her powers were sweeping, so she is always portrayed with this wide wingspan, almost like her mother, Nut, covering a wide area, a wide space. Isis. Now, the mystery of the missing phallus. So when she puts Osiris together again, and you can see this is distinctive headdress. This is Osiris, and he's got a slight grin on his face, realizing that he's being put back together. The job's not done yet. But they find 13 of the 14 pieces and put him back together. What they can't find is the penis, which has either been eaten by a fish in the Nile or a crocodile in the Nile. So Isis has to get creative, and she creates a penis out of earth and seeds, and manages to impregnate herself. Okay, so Immaculate Conception. She gets pregnant not in the ordinary way. There's a third Immaculate Conception, and this is Buddha's mother. Buddha is born in an unusual way as well. A white elephant visits his mother in the night. You see it, the elephant in relief up in the right upper hand corner as Buddha's mother sleeps, depicted in many ways. So Immaculate Conception. How about Immaculate Self-Conception? That's Gaia. She does the whole thing. She's the first living thing before men or other gods. She's the creator, the Greek Earth mother. We'll come to her in more definitive way in a second. But we get repeating themes here with Nut and Iris and the resurrection. And they're repeated in Greece after Gaia helps create the Greek pantheon. And the resurrection story is recreated every springtime when Persephone, the daughter of the goddess of fertility, Demeter, is allowed to leave Hades, by Hades, the underworld by Hades. You see, Hades had come up and kidnapped Persephone and held her in ransom, and a deal was made whereby Persephone gets to come and be with her mother in the springtime, and that makes Demeter very happy. So the earth becomes fertile. But then she has to return to Hades according to the deal in winter when the earth becomes unproductive and fallow. And so that's a familiar story in springtime, the resurrection. And that, of course, is the stone being rolled away from Jesus's tomb, and he escapes out into the springtime, the world. He gets a second life. And is the story of Christianity as Roman soldiers run in horror. Now, the promise of an afterlife is very potent, as you can imagine. And so long after Egypt falls and the Isis promise of an afterlife lives on in Rome as the Isis cult. This is before Rome turns to Christianity, which has its own promise of afterlife, of salvation. But until then, Isis could offer something that apparently none of the other Greek gods could offer humans as directly. So she lived on. Egyptian women also had political power. I've mentioned Hatshepsut, and here she's seen breastfeeding from Hathor, directly from the teat. This is herself. When Aiko and I were there, we took a rapt interest in her. There was also an empress in China too, never in India that I could find. And I'll talk more about the one in China. It's a kind of a fluke. There are actually two flukes in China, but never has there been a queen in the Middle East or the Mediterranean to hold power directly like Hatshepsut. Indirectly, Nefertiti, the wife of Akhenaten, he was very busy revolutionizing Egypt with monotheism, which failed. But while he was failing in that enterprise, she is said to have run Egypt. This is my wife in Egypt, being surprised at how quickly a camel goes from low down to high up. And this is my wife Aiko in front of the tomb of Rameses. So we, a lot of thinking about this is remembering some of the things we've seen in our travels. And my wife helps me prepare and research things and keeps me from going down rabbit holes, getting too deeply into minutia. So I have to acknowledge her for that. In Egypt, interestingly enough, in some cases, prenuptial agreements favored women. So again, India's tough because there's 2 million gods and goddesses. And I have to think a lot of it is related to what caste you're in, 5 major castes, but the 300 maybe offshoots, subcasts, and kind of incomprehensible to an outsider. But if you look up Earth Goddess, this is one that you get. This is another Earth Goddess. This is another one, the mother of time. Notice the many hands. We're going to see that later on. The hands, the feminine hands that want to reach out and help humanity. But she was also the mother of time, and time waits for no man, so it's very negative. Note here, she also has at her feet the lion. Seems to be interesting that this lion even makes it into India. But her daughter, time, will be pretty scary, so I want to give you a trigger warning. Close your eyes. Time is going to do us all in, and that's the way she is depicted. Although it's not clear it's a she in this picture. But there's always the Divine Mother, Devi, and there's in the era that just ends for us in our studies, which I said is 500 to 600 CE, there was a Devi cult at work in India, where you were getting a resurgent Hinduism after centuries of Buddhist dominance. And so the Divine Mother, Devi, and she lives on today. This is Devi in Michigan, USA. Now we're going to move away from Egypt, and a good transition point is Crete. Crete had a culture for almost 3,000 years BCE, so it took on a culture, no doubt from Egypt, but we don't know much about it. This is the so-called snake goddess. A lot of stories were made up about this, but nobody knows for sure what the function of the snake goddess was. For sure, there had to be some influence from Anatolia, the Earth Mother sensibility, and the other thing that we get on Crete is not the cow, but the bull. On Crete, Zeus disguises himself as a bull because he's fallen in love with a beautiful young lady, Europa, and he seduces Europa on Crete. So you can argue that Crete actually is the first European country, and that's why Europe got the name it did. But there's a problem when you fall in love with a bull. Your kids may be temperamental. And so you got the Minotaur, which is kept below the palace in Knossos in the labyrinth. And according to Greek myth, Theseus has to come traverse the maze and kill the Minotaur. Quite a contrast to the nurturing cow in Egypt. And this is the Minotaur, half bull, half man. So this is the family tree, and at the head of it, creating it, is Gaia, the creator goddess. And she creates Uranus. So here's another immaculate conception, if you will. And then she mates with Uranus, much like Oedipus would unintentionally. to have Rhea, and we've talked about Rhea before. She is not the original Earth Mother, but she comes pretty close, and she marries Cronus, and they have the first order of kids, including Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, and Hestia. And then second order Greek gods from Zeus and Hera. And the story with Hephaestus has two versions. But Zeus with a lot of other women, five major consorts that produce a lot of important Greek gods. And notice that here, floating off to the side, and echoing the problem that we had with Osiris's lost penis, we have Uranus's floating genitals. And that'll come into the story a bit later. Again, Gaia, which we've previewed before. And just a quick recap, the contrast between the creation. Now, back to Cybele on Anatolia. When Greek civilization evolved, the whole west coast of Anatolia was part of the maritime Greek culture, just as important, maybe even more, than on the peninsula side. And Cybele therefore evolved into Demeter, who we've met, whose daughter was kidnapped. She's Ceres in Rome, thus we get the word cereal. And we've heard her story, and here she is, out with her sister Hestia. We'll hear more about Hestia when we do Rome. The resurrection of her daughter in springtime, just to review, another version of this, how happy they are, and Demeter allows the earth to spring forth. They hop in their chariots and go home for 6 months away from Hades, who kidnapped her. Then, unfortunately, Persephone in wintertime has to go back down and be with Hades in the underworld. But back on above Earth, Demeter is the goddess of fertility, carrying that function of Cybele forward. And in Rome, she becomes Ceres. And just to recap, the start of the discussion of the moon, you remember our Venus of La Salle. Back in the hunter-gatherer days, there was an association with the moon, perhaps with the lunar cycle and menstruation. And by way of review, the Semites had a moon cult as well in USA. And so we're going to get Artemis, who is going to carry the torch, carry on with the moon myth in the Greek pantheon. She's the daughter of Zeus and Leto. Not much known about Leto, and we don't hear much about her other than her being the mother of Artemis and Apollo. They were twins. And so she is the moon goddess, constantly depicted at the moon. She's also the huntress goddess with her bow and arrow. And our middle son, Zachary is working on the Artemis project. Why is his space project called the Artemis project? Because it's going to be a space station going around the moon, not around the Earth as it does now. But our son is building the propulsion system, one of the many people helping design and build the propulsion system for the space station that will circle the moon, and it's called the Artemis project. So a direct relationship to the work of our offspring. Some depictions, she has horns, quite the opportunity for fantasy and artistry, the moon, the bow and arrow, the huntress. But she adds another Earth Mother function. You see the Sibyl, being the Earth Mother, has given to Demeter the fertility of the earth, but Artemis is given many breasts. So she is the symbol of nurturing humanity a little bit more directly. The first lecture that I got in medical school was by the dean, who was a surgeon who specialized in breast cancer. And he led off the first lecture I had. The first slide was of Artemis with in the manifestations of her many breasts. Now, Artemis in Rome becomes Diana. So if you see statues of Diana and Artemis, it's the same. The Romans duplicated the Greek pantheon, but gave them all different names that rolled off the tongue easier in their language than in Greek. So there she is in Asia Minor, and a temple is built for her, so grand that it was considered one of the 7 wonders of the world. And you remember early on when I talked about Sibyl and her origins in the middle of the Anatolia plain, in the lower part. Here, the Artemisium is built in the western edge of the Anatolian plain, on the ocean, and right here in the Aegean Sea. And here is Ephesus. That's where, ignore the other stuff in this map for now. I just pulled it up to show you where Ephesus was. Here is what remains of this seventh wonder of the world. But this is what is imagined it must have been like. Imagined that it must have been like. And here is a cartoon that depicts a historical moment when Paul visits Ephesus. This starts a correspondence between Paul and the citizens of Ephesus, who are living in the shadow of the Artemis cult, if you will. And so any new religion coming in here, particularly a Semitic religion that is Abrahamic and features more patrimony than the other religions, is going to have a tough time. So a lot of correspondence winds up as a book in the Bible, the Ephesians. And at some point, Paul condemns the witchcraft doings in the big temple of Artemis, declares that the Artemis cult is nothing but evil superstition, and takes whatever holy texts are associated and burns them. You have your first book burning. And there are going to be other examples of intolerance within Christianity. They suffered from intolerance until they were in charge, but once they got going, they were able to perpetrate it as well. And I'll have another example later on. So this, you can focus on Paul here and his visit, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Thessalonica, all books in the Bible. But both Peter and Paul are in their various travels eventually are taken to Rome, where they're both executed. The other structure that you see when you go to Ephesus that we saw, and that my youngest son just saw with his wife when they visited Ephesus, is this building. And this is where legend says Mary lived. Hard, impossible to document, doesn't exist. But the coincidence and the convenience that Mary should wind up in the city that celebrated the descendant of Sybil, Artemis / Diana, that's got to be more than a coincidence. The female cult part of that lived on with Mary and still does as a tourist attraction. And you can go inside, and this is somebody's fantasy of how Mary might have lived. Now, the Orthodox half, Eastern half of the Christian church critiques the Roman part, right? Constantinople versus Rome went on for over 1,000 years. And the Orthodox critique of Rome is the cult of Mary. This display in Ephesus would certainly go along with that. So if Greece had the influence of Egypt and Anatolia, shouldn't the women have had political influence? But they didn't, not at all. And why not? Well, there are other elements that came into Greece. As I go through history with my family, we talk about waves of wild men from the north. Wild men from the north, and wave after wave. Aryans wiped out Indus culture completely. And it was Aryan culture that evolved into Hinduism. A wave went into Greece, and you have to speculate that it was very strong masculine wave that maybe neutralized some of the influence from Asia Minor and some of the feminine influence from Egypt. In ancient Athenian law, women lacked legal rights completely, but you could imagine that they overcompensated for it with their own cult, the Athena cult. Like Sybil, Usa and Artemis to the east, she was there on the Greek peninsula. And you can see her figure towering over Athens. Uh, uh, Maybe this was one of the wonders of the world too, but they were making up for the fact that if we are not giving our women political power, but we're certainly giving them religious power, mythical power. And maybe that appeased women. Very colorful back in their day. This is in Nashville, where a 3/4 replica of the Parthenon has been created. The owl introduces the concept of wisdom and learning. So Athena is a complicated goddess, but she also aided violent men. Here, Hercules, she aided the Greeks at Troy. She helped Ulysses get home in the Odyssey, but she was also had some wisdom on her side. And again, this harkens back to the Akkadian goddess Ishtar. And remember, there was a picture of her with an owl as well. Aggressive women certainly existed in Greek myth, but mostly it was ameliorating women, the muses, that give us our great moments in culture were all women. And here were their specialties. Penelope, the faithful wife, a positive image. Sappho, the poetess, who lived her life on Lesbos and gave the possibility of other types of sexuality. Of course, homosexuality was part of Athens' life among men as well. But there is a character who, like Eve, curiosity did her in, and all of humanity. She opens the lid and releases evil, just like Eve did in the Garden of Eden. Hera is portrayed as a jealous and vengeful wife, but justly, no, because she had a lot to be jealous and vengeful about. Zeus was a very adventuresome sexually, as we pointed out. 5 major consorts, but 57 liaisons in all. Aphrodite is said to have employed her charms to make men lose their wits, but she had no mother, according to Hesiod, which brings us back to Uranus's genitals that have been floating out here. And in Hesiod's version, they are used to create Aphrodite, who has therefore a unique power over men to act crazy. As my wife jokes, men don't have enough blood for both their pecker and their brains. Medea, a witch or a victim. In the Greek myth, she's portrayed as a witch, but if a close reading of the story, we saw a wonderful play by Mary Zimmerman, Jason and the Argonauts, where you see Medea being shot by Cupid, sent by Aphrodite to make her fall in love with Jason, which she does. And Mary Zimmerman makes her point by having Medea wear her blood-stained garment from Cupid's arrow for the whole play, making the point that she didn't make this decision responsibly. This is something that she was forced into by the gods. Roman law, similar to Greek, their citizenship was tiered. They really didn't have political rights, made up in part by the Vestal virgins, who were a big part of the Roman religious festivals. We talked earlier about the Isis cult, so you would have had the Vestal virgins offering a similar type of nurturing and regeneration. And Hestia was the goddess of the Vestal virgins, the virgin of the hearth. You don't hear that much about her in Greek myths, but here she is. She's a first order. She's Zeus's sister, a first order product in the family tree. In Rome, women are often portrayed as conniving. We hear this in modern contemporary times, that politically strong women are ambitious. And here we get a portrayal of Agrippina, the mother of Nero. And she maybe, conniving is a good word. She was so conniving that Nero wound up killing her. This was them in happier days, mother and son, but this is her after being poisoned by Nero. Nero's real enemy, though, was Boudicca, who was a northern Celtic goddess who organized the British people in those days with her daughters to oppose the Romans. She lost, and they were all slain. There's going to be more strong northern women as we go through history after in the next 1,500 years, certainly. And here is the Norse goddess Frigg, who named our Friday, along with her other powerful goddesses in Norse mythology. Movie recommendation, an Icelandic movie, Woman at War here, channeling Artemis. A very important part of the movie is her skills with a bow and arrow. Andrea Merkel, of course, is portrayed as a Norse goddess and part of the original thesis that women can run the world better than men. This is the second example of intolerance. Hypatia lived in Alexandria. Her father and her worked at the great library at Alexandria. And this was portrayed very well in the movie Agora. And it shows how, because she was a woman and she was involved in science and knowledge, that the religious community saw her as a witch. As I recall from the movie, both the Jewish community and the Christian community. And anyway, she is killed by a mob historically. And we get the full story of that in this movie, The Agora, 2009. Hindu, I have to say something about more contemporary Hindu women around the time of 500. They did have this tradition, if you've seen Around the World in 80 Days or read it, of widows having to accompany their husbands at the funeral pyre, suti, it was called. The mother Deve, about the year 500, where our sessions have ended, the cult was revived in India as a resurgent Hinduism came back to take its place against Buddhism that had dominated for 400 to 500 years. And there's not much Buddhism in India today. Hinduism is back. Deve is the mother goddess, offering the same sort of things that Isis and Artemis and Sybil and Mary would offer. Now we get to China, and this is the grand ending, the fireworks at the very end. You start in a hole with the three obediences demanded by Confucianism. That daughters obey their husband, daughters obey their fathers, wives obey their husbands, and widows obey their sons. Then they're ousted from the family if they don't give you a son, or if you spoke excessively. Treated as ornaments. Foot binding, for some reason, had erotic appeal. Very strange. And here is the empress, the one, there are two, but this is website. I left it in because the description of what she did after she got power to the concubines who had serviced first her husband and then her son who took the throne. She succeeded both of them and worked the inner circles of the court. This is during the Han Dynasty. We're talking now around 100 years AD, as I recall. And then there's another empress that takes the throne under similar circumstances by inheriting from a husband and son. She was not quite as cruel a torturer as the last one, but she was ruthless enough to marry her stepson just so she could seize power. So that's the last that we see of female rulers in China. So as we go into this new religious era, according to our textbook, that goes from 500 to 1,500, roughly the time of Luther. Buddhism and Christianity helped boost the status of women by saying that they were spiritually equal to men. And they established religious communities where women could go, nunneries, if you will. And both Christ and Buddha were gentle souls, and they would naturally favor the feminine side in problem solving, if you go to the original texts. But Abrahamic Judaism managed to live on in Christianity and Islam. Yes, there were nunneries, but you still have the New Testament where Timothy says that Adam was the one who was deceived, the woman was the deceiver, and she was the sinner. So you still have that legacy to contend with. And we see it in contemporary Christianity as well. And Islam, the saving grace here is that Muhammad was originally a caravan driver, driving goods from Mecca and Medina up to Damascus. And one of his clients was a rich widow in Mecca. She liked the way he ran caravans, and one thing led to another, and they got married. And under her influence, he made sure that Islam gave women more property rights and more legal rights than they had had in the Semitic society preceding. And here, this is Persian because you see Muhammad portrayed, which is very rare. Only Persian art would do that. Otherwise, his face is not to be shown. But here you look at this angel, there's certainly feminine qualities. She's the one who dictated the Quran. But the Middle East had a tradition going back to the Assyrians of secluding their women, covering their women. In Buddhism, you also had nunneries, place where young girls who maybe weren't wanted at home could go. Certainly beats infanticide, which was practiced in both India and China. We visited this nunnery in Burma, quite organization. But in China, Buddhism got to China, and it was met with the persistent demands of the Confucian ethic. The women had duties in the family, and they were just not going to be as free as Buddhism would have liked. But they were compensated. And a remarkable thing was that the god of compassion in India became a goddess in China. So here's the Bodhisattva, that's just the Buddhist word for saint of compassion. It's a mouthful. He was a man in India. He even had wings. But compassion gets to China, and compassion is recognized as a feminine thing. And so in China, he becomes Guanyin. Guanyin. A lot of different names, but this is the most common one. And you see giant statues of Guanyin everywhere. The next slide is a real place, the Sisan Monastery, and they have built this giant statue of Guanyin. Some of her ornaments occasionally are pearls, which are meant to represent the moon. So there's some association between her and the moon. She has the many hands that we saw in Durga. So she is, after all, comes from India. So there would be an overlap. Buddhism is just a reform movement of Hinduism, so a lot of the tropes continue. And she is the goddess of compassion. She needs many hands to relieve all the suffering. And here she is in many manifestations. These are all hands, all hands. This is the fireworks at the end of the display, the grand finale. All hands in India and in China. And Guanyin, who is now a female. And there were places where we would go in Japan, which adopted Chinese Buddhism, essentially, lock, stock, and barrel, where all of a sudden this kind of statue would loom up in the middle of nowhere, sometimes with a child, sometimes in repose, sometimes more entertaining mode, sometimes spectacular. And this is my friend, has a Guanyin statue. He's actually a friend of mine who has been singing the praises of feminine competence for a long time, recognizing the limitations of men and their testosterone. A true feminist he is. His name is Roger Barrow. In Tibet, so this brings up the issue of political conflict with the current autocratic, totalitarian government And occasionally you'll see a headline like this: orders crackdown at large religious statues. Are they getting too popular? This is before COVID, right? And all of a sudden, wait a minute, Buddhism gets a pass. Xi Jinping has a soft spot for Buddhism. And he better well, because if you start messing with the strong feminine presence of Guanyin, whose statue you can see in almost every Chinese restaurant, you're courting trouble. So with my group of students, we look ahead to the next 1,000 years. Women lost some power because of trade, long distance trade, and the risk of long distance trade. So they weren't as involved as much in business. They weren't allowed in crafts in many instances. And some people argue that their religiosity diverted them from attaining true power. But now that it's safe to travel and automation has neutralized men's physical advantage, will things change? And the answer is, it looks like it. And here's the election coming up, which women are lining up for voting Democrat. There may be the largest presidential voting gap in history, according to polling. Women mostly can care about healing from the pandemic, and they really don't want to have anything to do with anything that appears racially offensive. They're sensitive to that. So those two issues, men should probably just follow the way of the Buddha and line up behind these statues and meditate, walk off stage for a while, and see if the women can repair all the damage that has been done, and put the world back together and heal its wounds. And that is where I stop. Thank you, and Godspeed. So I'm trying to make sure that I get this recording. Still looking.